Introducing our speaker tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce a great friend of the Federation, Tom Del Beccaro. Tom is a former chair of the California GOP. He's a former Senate candidate. He's an attorney. He's a frequent radio and television commentator, a regular contributor to Fox News and Fox Business, the Epoch Times, and Newsmax. He is chairman of California Revival, and he's the publisher of politicalvanguard.com. And you can find lots of really great articles on that website. He's written several books, including The Divided Era, which discusses the history of political unity and division in our country. He's a frequent speaker and supporter of RWF clubs and events, and has been for many years. And he's also rumored to be a pretty good chef. So I just want to welcome Tom Del Beccaro. Thank you for being with us tonight.
It's great to be with you. I think over the years, I've done probably over 500 events for CFRW in the last 20 something years. And those dinners to which she was blithely referring to are with a veil over it. I think I've raised about $20,000 for CFRW over the years. Happy to do it. Always been a grassroots guy. My family's always been grassroots. So happy to help. She didn't mention, but my motion picture debut is in the theaters right now. It's called Sweetwater. It's about the first African-American to join the NBA. I have a small role, but nevertheless, you'll see me on screen. I play the owner of the Washington Capitals, and it's a great story about America. It takes place in 1950. It's in the theaters now. If you don't get a chance to see it, it'll be on Netflix soon enough, and then it goes globally. So excited about that. And I have 2 or 3 other movies where I'll be acting in that are going to be made over the next year as well. Just trying to have some fun. Most of my time, other than sadly having to be an attorney, is currently consumed with writing my next book. Although I write a lot, I don't write a lot of books because the kind of writing I do isn't meant to be big bang things about momentary issues in time, trying to, agitate people. I try and take a more thoughtful approach. I thought I grabbed my book, but I didn't, The Divided Era. And we're going to talk about that. But the current book I'm writing is my life's work. For those of you who don't know much about me, my parents were Italian Catholic conservatives in Chicago in the 40s and 50s, which are essentially unicorns. It was incredibly rare. And my father started me watching the political shows, reading The Economist magazine and history books as a 10-year-old. And that's why I'm still single, because that's what I do. So my latest work is called The Lessons of the American Civilization. About 2/3 done with it. The format of the book is I explain, there's something called, it's called historical philosophy, the kind of writing I do, which what Will and Ariel Durant, some of you may know the story of civilization by Will and Ariel Durant. So what they do is explain how civilizations come together, rise and fall, what traits they have throughout that. And so what this book is an explanation, not just from the Durants, but from the great historical philosophers in history, explaining how civilizations, I've sort of lay down the guidelines, and then we go through the story of the American civilization. It'll be out next year in some form, meaning I'm not sure what publisher, because there's a lot of things that I'm involved with, so I'm just didn't do the book deal yet. Hopefully you'll do that quite shortly, but it's all consuming to do this. You can imagine that I'm covering a lot of civilizations. A lot in the United States, started in the 1500s, this American civilization. And it is certainly evolving quickly today, as you well know. And part of that, excuse me, I have my tea here. Part of that relates to the topic tonight, which I wrote a piece that you can get at politicalvanguard.com called The Criminalization of Politics Takes a Dramatic Turn. And the reference, of course, is to this New York indictment of Trump. Now, taken by itself, it is a very partisan act by a partisan DA who is funded by a highly partisan people. And it looks like, and it's an extraordinary thing, obviously never been done in history before, but what I'd like to do is place it in much greater context. So we need to take a step back a little and understand a little something about the nature of government and how it grows. The United States government is a far cry from where we started. The American civilizations in 1700, the largest town in America was Boston with a paltry 300 people, 3,000 people. Boston in 1700, largest city. It's not a city, 3,000 people at the time. London had 500,000. So just imagine how small America is. By 1800, 11 years after we adopt the Constitution, Philadelphia becomes the largest city, still only 33,000 people. London, of course, is 1 million by this time. America is a very rural place, and limited government in history is very plausible in a rural country. But once urbanization occurs, once commercialization occurs, and by that I mean we become a commercial society as well as an agrarian society, and then especially when industrialization occurs, the strains on limited government are unstoppable for many reasons. Part of it is industrialization, immature industrialization produces some very difficult work environments. And once you move to the city and you pack people together and the media gets bigger, the spotlight on those things grows dramatically, these work conditions. Now, if any of you grew up on a farm, you knew how hard work conditions were and that you worked 15-hour days. And when we started, children 6, 7 years old were working. But when that happens in the countryside and you're in the 1700s, the media doesn't follow it. But once it reaches the city, and this is true throughout history, whether it's the Greeks of the 400 BC, 500 BC, and especially 300 BC, these things magnify. And when commercialization and factories reach their peak, there are constant cries for the regulation of capitalists and the regulation of work conditions. And there is also what happens in commercialization and industrialization is some people get really rich and some people are attracted to the city in poverty. And this argument today is class warfare. Class warfare is as old as cities, believe it or not. In Florence of the 1400s, at its height of the Italian Renaissance, when it was transforming international banking and so many other things, Florence today has 55,000 people. At its height in the 1400s, there were 100,000 people, including those within the city, but as much as 40,000 to 50,000 were those living not in homes, around the city and in its streets. So this notion of homelessness and poverty is as old as commercialization. You can't, when you're an agrarian society, you don't live on the edge in poverty. You are part of a family. You are part of some system where you are working. Only homelessness and the like is really endemic to the city. So why am I telling you this? Well, as a society becomes more commercial, and especially more industrial and urbanized, the calls for government to step in and grow are irresistible. And so what was plausible in the countryside becomes unbounded in the city. And that's the story of, part of the story of how governments grow large. Today, America has, once it comes out of industrialization in the 1920s, and you have the first big hiccup, really big hiccup economically in the Great Depression, government becomes unbounded. So when when Calvin Coolidge decides not to run again for president in 1928 because he thinks government's out of control, the budget in his time, which we have to use different numbers now because of inflation, but keep in mind today's federal budget is 7 trillion. In today's dollars, his budget would have been about 85 billion. So let's say that again. The entire federal government would be 85 billion, not 7 trillion. And what happened with FDR and the unwinding of the Constitution, and then especially with television in the 70s, you get this incredible explosion in government. Why am I telling you this? Well, as government grows, the competition to control it grows right along with it. And that's essentially why we're so divided today, because every decision government makes picks a winner and a loser and someone to pay for it. And there are huge competitions to get that deal, whether it's between McDonnell Douglas and a different military contractor, or whether it's AT&T and how they're going to be regulated versus the other providers on the internet or television cable or cell phones. All of that competition grows. And as that competition grows, you get more lobbyists, but the power of parties grows as well. Because now these parties are dispensing enormous power. Now, keep in mind, when we started this all out under Jefferson, let's say, when government was finally formed, the government spending at all levels is about 2%, maybe 3%. Today, of course, it is closer to 45%, almost half of every dollar. And then when you throw in the cost of regulations, it goes way over that to about 55% of the economy is government or its costs that it imposes on people. Now that's a lot of money to be throwing around. And so the bigger government, the more entrenched the parties become, the more party discipline becomes essential. Because if you wander in the middle, Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin, you don't help your one side or the other. And as soon as you become unuseful to them, think of Dianne Feinstein, and this is true through history, they're push you aside. I don't care whether you gave birth to them. At this stage, you're going to be pushed aside. Now that is one dynamic of where we are today. The other dynamic which people need to understand is that limited governments are local and fairly responsive, right? So you're a city council person, you're mayor in a small town. My town is 25,000 people. Yeah, they're liberal where I live, but they're still dealing with a local issue. The larger government becomes, a new dynamic takes place. Yes, they're responsive to their constituents. In a sense, Democrats help Democrats, Republicans help Democrats, but a different dynamic takes place, which is really has America by the throat right now. And this, by the way, is very normal historically. What happens is the levers of government and the people that pull them, the agencies and their appointed personnel, begin to want to make sure that they sustain themselves at the cost of democracy or anything, republics, anything. The entrenched bureaucracy wants to sustain itself at your expense, you, the body politic. So I have a friend, you might know him, Steve Bannon, and in a discussion with him, I told him he needs to stop using the phrase deep state, because deep states are never deep. They're right there on the surface. They are the entrenched bureaucracy. You're all aware of Alexis de Tocqueville and his Democracy in America. And what he loved about America in part was that we had private associations that helped people. Everything didn't turn to government. But he also mused about what government was more intrusive. Was it, and more powerful, was it the French monarchy or the English parliamentary system, even with a king? But it was, the king had by then had given up some of his powers, as you know. And he, easy to make the case that a French king was judge, jury, and literally executioner, right? Could decide everything. But he said the English parliamentary system with its attendant bureaucracy, I don't speak French, so we're paraphrasing him, was more intrusive. What did he mean by that? Well, there's many more tentacles. It turns out that dictators, as dictatorial as they are, and sometimes megalomaniacs, don't trust a lot of people. And so their infrastructure of power tends to be limited, because if you extend it too far, at too Brutus, you run a risk. So today you watch Putin and how he trusts no one, moves around, blah, blah, blah. Muammar Gaddafi used to do that. Very normal. In America today, the entrenched government is against the body politic. Not only do they know better than all of you combined 100 times, but they want to make sure you can't undo them. And any rude politician that comes along and says you have too much power and we're going to take it back from you, they get together to resist. And that, of course, is one explanation of what happened when Donald Trump said, "Train the swamp." This too is incredibly normal. In 1896, when William Jennings Bryan, and you should read his Cross of Gold speech, because it's about, except for a few details, it's about what every Democrat has said since, every one of them. He started barnstorming the country. He was the first presidential candidate to go around the whole country and rile people up. And he riled so many people up that the powers that be at the time, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, and Rockefeller, were definitely worried that he was going to become president and change their game, their power game. So they spent $250,000, which seems paltry to you now, but it was a staggering amount of money in those days to defeat him. Why'd they defeat him? Because the status quo in power is non-responsive to you. They're responsive to themselves. And the dynamic that is so concerning is what makes democracy work and why capitalism is so important historically is, prior to capitalism taking hold in the 1800s, there was, bits and pieces of capitalism throughout history. But prior to it taking significant hold in England, and then more so in the United States, you cannot have democracy republics where those who own the power own the economy as well. So if you look at the entire feudal history of monarchs, they own the land and they own the power. and you didn't get to own land, and your family would stay poor roughly from, if you were in some remote part of Germany, probably 300-400 years of poverty in a row, because you owned nothing and you couldn't really sell anything. The brilliance of capitalism was that instead of land being the only wealth, goods became valuable. Money became valuable. The ability to deliver goods and services became powerful. And so what happens in capitalism in history is that it separates economic and political power. And when that balance occurs, what happens? You can have a republic. You can have a democracy. Now, what's happening today is the opposite of that. We have pulled it apart, and now it's coming back together again. When Moderna and Pfizer can make public policy and you can't, so that they can make money but get to buy politicians, your democratic voice is lost. And this was no minor thing. They shut down the economy. This is no minor policy issue. But healthcare companies have been doing that for years. Military providers, McDonnell Douglas has had enormous, those kind of things. The closer big corporations come to government, the less freedom you have, the less democracy exists, the more they resist you. So how does that get us to Alvin Bragg? Well, when this dynamic is ginning itself up, historically, one party aligns with that. And even though the Democrats were anti-military, anti-government, free love in the 60s, not that any of you had heard about that, they have now become a typical socialist party, which is capitalists are bad, inequity is bad. Look, this equity thing is the same argument that was made in the BC 3rd century, 4th century in Greece. Google the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius Gracchus, Gracchus, end of the end of the Roman Republic, and his desire to redistribute land and talk about inequality. These are old things. So a party aligns itself with that dynamic and becomes the Socialist Party, Labour Party in England. And they continue to bash capitalism and demand more spending. So recently, last week, when Kevin McCarthy, who's doing a spectacular job, in my view, when he just said, let's freeze spending, freeze it, remember, it jumped a whole bunch last year. What did they say? Oh, you're hurting the poor. We're at government, federal budget, 7 trillion. Under Bush, it was 4 trillion. Are we really hurting the poor? Well, yes, because we're spending too much, causing inflation and displacing and hurting many, many people. But they don't see it that way. So when this dynamic we're in now, the reason why Alvin Bragg exists, and he'll be no more important than Michael Avenatti in a couple of years. These are all bit players in the crime and the rise of socialism. Big government resisting those who have the audacity to say we should be free. That's the world we live in today. And, we are so far past the point in our historical timeline that government is a positive influence. Every extra dollar government spends today is inflationary. Look, we got 32 trillion in debt. Raise your hand if you think that's going to be paid off. It's not. Every addition to that is inflationary. Inflation is a very simple concept. The economy grows like this. the money supply should grow right along with it, because if more transactions, more things, they should grow together and it's stable. So what happened in America? The economy was going like this, COVID came and it went like that, and spending went like this. This gap, if sustained, is inflation. And that gap is still there, and they still keep spending. So why did the Democrats, why did they hate Trump? Why do some Republicans hate Trump? Remember, I'll wind up real quick. Remember, 9 of the richest 20 counties in America are where? Around Washington, D.C. They're making money off you. Leave them alone, they say. We know better. We know how to educate your kids. We know, fill in the blank. The point of my talk today, though, isn't that there's total despair. What we need is a leader who does this. In very divisive periods, division is soothed when a leader comes along, like JFK or Reagan, and says, we've been fighting, but there are higher purposes. JFK said, we'll cut taxes for everyone, grow the economy, go to the moon, Peace Corps, and we created a higher purpose. And instead of looking at each other like this, people looked upward together. Reagan did the same thing. Next time you go to church, you know why there's high ceilings? Because they literally want you to look up and see that there's something greater than yourself. So, are we in tough times? Yes. Who caused this? Well, you don't get us to a $7 trillion budget with one party. What can we do? Understand we can't keep going this way. Sweden went from 70% of the economy government spending down below 50. We have to get to that point. We have to get to that understanding, and true leaders will lead us in that direction. Thank you very much.
Whoa, what? Ah, so good.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Great.
We are going to open this up to a few questions, if you don't mind.
Whatever you like, yeah.
Okay.
That's always the perfect answer.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, Nancy, you go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Now I understand what you're saying, you know, about it's the leaders and how they work with each other, but we also have a lot of our election system that is in stress. I mean, we have mail-in ballots, which, you know, that came about by just like what you were talking about, the COVID and that. But these are all kind of roads to, you know, bad behavior, you might say. And do you think there's anything we can do? Like, we've got provisional ballots and we've got mail-in ballots and we've got long stretches.
Yeah, we have a red state, blue state divide on the laws of voting. The reason why we have all mail-in voting is that dynamic I described. One party and their cohorts in Washington want to keep power. They know it involves voter fraud. That's what they're doing. Voter fraud is as old as time. We had a tremendous amount of voter fraud in the South after the Civil War to prevent Blacks from voting. In the sense, what they did was they stuffed ballot boxes to overwhelm their vote. If you have a cell phone, these smartphones started in 2006, roughly. A little before that. 20 years from now, who knows on earth what these will be able to do. They already have 100 times the power of the computers that landed on the moon. They're going to want you to vote on these things. It's going to be even harder voter integrity. So first of all, we have to understand there's a reason why Franklin said a republic, madam, if you can keep it. That's number one. Number two, I'm not, computer balloting is an open door to fraud. I think there should be paper ballots. I don't think we should have months to vote. Mind you, look up Andrew Jackson's election, where one time they started voting in April. But of course, we lived in a very agrarian society. Getting people to the polls was a very big deal. So yeah, we have to clean up those systems if we want to preserve it. But the reason why those systems are corrupted is by power bases that want to keep their power. California wants to have only Democrats in the legislature, wants to keep that power, so they're doing this kind of voting, even though they send out, and they damn well know they're sending out 500,000 fake ballots. This is the nature of it, and we have to be vigilant. And the only way you're vigilant is in person. Now, look, did I freeze? I have told these people for years, if you want to stop voter fraud, you have to use video. The number of drop boxes has been reduced in many states, but also by videoing them constantly, it reduces the chance for voter fraud. Video is a huge deterrent.
I think that 2,000 Mules brought that point
Yes.
home very
Yeah,
well.
I would like to point out that I was the first in the country, 36 hours after the election, to point out how voter fraud occurred in Wisconsin. Basically, I outlined the whole thing. They provided the data 2.5 years later. But go look at the Epic Times and the date of my piece in the 2020 election, and you'll see 36 hours later, I explained how it was done.
Tom, I have a question. Thank you so much for your thoughtful insight today. You mentioned transformational leaders. Do you see anybody on the horizon? I mean, you don't have to name anybody specific, but do we have one?
Oh, sure. Go ahead and name them.
Okay, so
Right.
understand this. My ultimate frustration with this is not whatever I told you is not locked in a safe somewhere. I'm trying to think of the what was that song in the 70s where, was it Maria McGovern, where under a rock, what does it say? Peace on earth or whatever it was. They were searching for it, killed each other just to find under the rock. It said peace on earth. Do you remember that? This is easy stuff. There's a lot of books on JFK and what he did. There's a ton of books on Reagan and how he did it, right? So this is what bothers me the most. The problem with many candidates is the consultant class. Many candidates, I don't know whose quote it was, is that it said that to be a great leader, you need to read. The problem is those with power don't have the time to read. And they don't have the ability to overrule consultants who have turned into combatants. They have no capacity to teach these people to do this. We're in a bad cycle. Having said that, it only takes one person to step in and create a new dynamic. I'm not saying they're going to turn the government around and life's going to be good. But it is not that hard. And all of these people running, and I have dispensed some advice to one campaign. How refreshing would it be to simply say, hey, look, America, we've been at each other's throats, but here's how we can move forward. People, it'd be shocking. Maybe CNN wouldn't cover it, but it would be shocking. So yeah, it really blows my mind how ill-prepared this has become. I'm hopeful that in our time, someone will come along to do it. Having said that, I'll be just brutally honest. No one is doing that right now.
There always seems to be a dark horse that comes out of the blue somewhat. It's kind of funny, in the history.
Yeah, look, in March of, I hope I get this right, 87? March of 87, Bush was at 91% in the polls and no Democrat thought they should run, so they didn't put their name in, or was it 88? And some nobody loser from Arkansas put in his name.
Yeah.
So yes, I would recommend people run for president. I am in the minority saying that I'm in favor of the former UN ambassador running. She has a voice. We need to reach many more people than ever. And we can't reach them with one voice. I see someone online that I must say hello to, because without Lois Godfrey, I would not be sitting in this chair. Her support for me from the very beginning, for no good reason, was transformational. So Lois, it's so great to see you. Now I totally got lost. I got Misty there.
Lois has a question for you.
No, I think she's just waving hi.
All right, okay.
Next question.
This is from Lisa Scott and she's asking, based on your assessment of the type of leader it would take to get us focused on a higher goal, do you foresee Trump as being the leader who could get us there? And I'll add to her question and say, if not him, do you see anybody on the horizon?
It would not take very much for Trump to turn. And so I am hopeful he will. If you're that much in the lead, you should not talk about your opponents in your own primary. It's illogical. Why are you giving them press? So I am hopeful he will be able to do that. I mean, Joe Biden's 70% of Americans say he shouldn't run. There's never been a poll like that in history. Ron DeSantis starts swinging at Trump. There's no point strategically for him to swing at Trump. If Ron DeSantis wants to be president, the only way he's going to be president is if a huge amount of Trump supporters like him. If he swings at Trump, and Trump has a almost unnatural fan base, if he swings at Trump, that fan base won't like DeSantis and he can't get there. I just don't understand either camp's actions right now. I get Nikki Haley is low in the polls, but she speaks to a group and she's taking the shots at Democrats. This is what she should do. She shouldn't mention Trump either. She should just talk about how they go forward. Elections are always about tomorrow. Napoleon said leaders are dealers in hope. Well, when you're telling people your opponent stinks, you're not dealing in hope, you're dealing in mud. And people like hope.
All right, Pamela Spinadels asks, we, the majority of citizens, seem to have become so complacent, preoccupied, and unconcerned about what's happening because of misinformation from our media. How can we possibly reach the masses and convince America of the danger we are in?
So I do love these questions. Point one, the periods of time in world history that the media has been objective is barely non-existent. American history, the media was biased, really biased, between 1770 and about 1905. It had a brief period of not being very biased, ramped up bias during the Great Depression, ramped up bias during World War II, and then it really ramped up again during Vietnam. So the natural state is for media to be biased. So I don't want people to think that CNN is extraordinary. During the run-up to the Civil War, the fire breathers, that's what they were called in the South, breathed fire into breaking from the Union. Sam Adams, Henry Cabot Lodge called him one of the great American statesmen. Sam Adams had an erstwhile relationship with the truth. He blew up the Boston Massacre in ways it wasn't, and did other things. Look, he started a country. These are the margin of errors that are permitted when you look back at things. But the basic answer to your question is, and I told this to Karl Rove driving in a car, I'm trying to remember when it was, because I talked about this to somebody last week. I said, y'all are never going to win anything arguing with the Washington Post or staying in Washington, D.C. And what you need to do is leverage cable. This was during Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. And of course, you know, they were claiming racism, all these blah, blah, blah. I said, start doing town halls all around the country, constantly. The other thing we need to understand is, I hope by now you realize that Washington isn't going to reform itself. It's why we send governors to Washington. It's why we fight City Hall. The way to transform a government is to start a grassroots movement away from it and let it catch fire. Prop 13, are you ready? Prop 13 tore down the Berlin Wall. Why do I say that? A man named Howard Jarvis, who's not very telegenic, back in the day when we had the phone, not my phone, the phone, they went out door to door and got signatures, literally. Created a wildfire, Prop 13, changed California politics, brought Republicans into power in the assembly, helped get rid of Roseburg. And then Prop 13 spread across the country. Ronald Reagan wrote it to the White House. And last I checked, Berlin Wall came down because of his result. Much can happen, but it happens away from government. It doesn't happen historically, really never happens within. 20 years from now, 50 years from now, I believe historians will look back at the Trump presidency and say what he didn't do enough issue-wise to create a movement greater than his own presidency. There should have been an issue that he grasped. I talk about this in my book, The Divided Era, and made that a signature thing to take around the country and gain greater support for, not from Washington. Literally go, look, when George Washington was president, he went around the country twice for 6 months. Okay, James Monroe did a similar thing. They unified the country around their particular purposes. Yes, you can do a lot of things as president, you have all these other things. But that's something that needs to be done.
I have a question. And Nancy, you're going to get mad at me, but I'm kind of getting out of order here a little bit. I'm going to go back to our sheet here, our cheat sheet. And I'm not even going to go in order on that. You've talked a lot about the history of the country and the politics nationally. What about here in California? What? It almost
You mean
seems,
Gavin Newsom called in the National Guard to stop fentanyl deaths in San Francisco? That's how bad it is.
yay for Gavin. He's
6
right
miles
on
from
it.
me, 6 miles from me, some guests from Oakland used AK-47s to rob people in their car of their jewelry. So the answer is California has issues that people are bottoming out about: crime, water, homelessness. But just being brutally honest with you, the Republican Party at large does not present a plausible alternative to voters. They don't know the alternative. It's a simple thing to do. The Democrats want us to have 50 gallons of water each a year, which, if you're living in a high rise in San Francisco and you don't have hair, is fairly plausible. But what's the alternative? Simple enough. You draft some legislation. You're in the supermajority. You might as well go do something with your free time. And you sell an alternative door to door, like Howard Javris. That is how movements start. There is enough issues on which this can be done. This is not locked in a safe. Nothing I'm saying is on this particular issue is unknown to mankind. Someone has to do it. I advocated it many times when I was vice chairman, chairman. Here's what we did one time. The Democrats back in 2010 had a bill that they wanted to change the definition of how you commit a felony for child pornography. And it was always based on the number of pictures you had. They tried to change the definition that if you had a CD of them, the CD only counted as one. Just imagine that. So what did we do as vice chairman? What we did is I had 4 legislators write op-eds. I lined up radio hosts from San Diego to the Canadian border to talk about it all. We sent out emails. Back in the day, I had a huge email list. Steve Frank had an huge email list, John Fleischman, a couple others. We blanketed the state with emails. And within the email, we gave the phone numbers of certain Democrat legislators. And they were besieged. There was a press conference on it in Sacramento, and the bill went down. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, no, this is more of a statement. It ends with a question. It's from Joanne Ludwig. If Joe Biden is the best the Democrats have, and apparently he is, that's pretty doggone pathetic. Why don't Democrats realize that? Even they aren't even going to have a presidential debate this time. Why even have a convention if there's no competition?
Well, that's a great example of what they're doing, of what I mean by a party aligned with bureaucracy to sustain government itself. So Joe Biden's the caretaker. He doesn't even make decisions. It's a perfect example. This is a good arrangement for them.
He's just the babysitter.
Well,
Could
Not
I,
even that.
I would not give my grandchild or my child to him.
oh, no. Could I ask a question, ladies?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, is it time, Tom, or would it even be feasible for another contract with America? Are Americans hungry for a vision from the Republicans?
And who's asking this?
I'm sorry.
Janet.
Janet.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Janet.
Always. Procter and Gamble would never put a product out and say, put it on the shelves and not advertise it. How do you make a difference in the world? Advertising. It is staggering that they refuse to do this.
I don't
And the
understand.
contract with America worked. Why haven't they done it since? They were vilified. It was contract on America. It was demonized. Why? Because Democrats and the media didn't want it to work again. Let me ask you something. If you ever go to dinner with your friends and you say to them, follow me, and we'll go eat. What do? 100% of the time you tell them, we're eating at such and such place. Why do you do that? Well, in case you get separated, they know where to go. If you want someone to follow you, it's a good idea telling them where you want to go. It applies to much in life, including politicians. But marketing is the weak point of Republicans. It always has, because they don't have the ability to argue the facts against inequality. You hear it now. Take the whole slavery issue. There's more slaves today by far than ever. America was the first place in the country to elect an African-American to office in the late 1700s. You know when England elected their first? I think it's 1958. Why do our children believe that we're the worst? Well, that's what the schools want them to do. But we don't talk to people. And you can't lead people without talking to them. And you can't talk to them through the Washington Post or on the nightly news. You got to go to, this is a campaign for America.
Okay, we have another question. This is from LaJoyce Robinson. The Republicans started to lose when the people voted in open primaries. Would
In
it
this
be worth
state,
in this state? Would it be worth our time to start door to door to get a closed primary back?
yeah, I was one of the people who spoke most against Prop 14. And Arnold Schwarzenegger brought it in, and Charles Munger brought it in. And Abel Maldonado brought it in. Total disaster. Wiped out third parties. Third parties are a very important check on the big parties. The Republican Party was a third party that was a check on the Whig Party and surpassed it. We don't have that dynamic anymore. Yeah, we need to turn that over if we're going to win elections in this state. But it'd take a big sell job and a lot of money. We've let them get so far ahead.
Hey, one last question and a voice save for you is, what can we do? What is your idea of what we can do to start getting things back in order in California? Just give us some direction.
Sort of put everything I've tried to say together, but start with one thing, not everything. One of the mistakes parties make in history is an attempt to do everything at once. What did Coolidge say? We can't do everything at once, but we can do something at once. So pick a issue. I mean, they've given us every issue possible. Pick a issue. I really like water. Crime is there. Homelessness is harder because it's actually a very difficult issue to resolve when you let it get out of control. Crime, that, and start this Howard Jarvis approach. It's going to take every Republican working together. Who are the enemies of every Republican working together? Consultants. I find it semi-amusing that today, not Connie Conway, who was Trump's who's the Conway, the national?
Kellyanne
Kellyanne
Conway.
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 Please don't tell her I did that. I was in her house. She was 70 floors up in the UN building. And I am so afraid of heights, horrified.
Mhm.
I was 20 feet from the window, and her husband, who nobody likes now. She goes, Tom, why is she so afraid? And he goes, he thinks the building's going to fall. It's true. Anyway, she too is shooting at consultants, because consultants don't make money off the brand, but you can't win without a brand. Reason why VHS beat out Beta, which was a far superior technology, was all marketing. So Nike changed the shoe industry with one shoe. They didn't put out 60 shoes at once. They put out one shoe, one logo. That's how parties had the Republican Party become famous. I guarantee you it wasn't its farm policy on fertilizer. It picked the biggest issue of the day and fought for it. I mean, history is chock full of this stuff. Alas. Anyway, I appreciate you allowing me to come on. If you want me to, excuse me, love speaking for your groups, love raising money. I do love cooking. I do want to thank, I only saw Lois. I don't know. I don't know if Joy Stewart's here tonight, but she, along with Marianne Hedstrom and others, the CFRW was behind me. I would not have become chairman without you. And I'm not saying, and everything has flowed from there, including, weirdly enough, my movie career, because a political person who knew me introduced me to the director. So
Do you want to plug your movie again?
yeah, it's called Sweetwater. You'll be able to get it online shortly, and then yeah, keep watching. I actually wrote a movie that's going to be made next year. I'll be in that one as well. So thank you to everyone. Always enjoy speaking to you. Sorry I
Thank
went
you,
so
Tom.
long, and I
No,
look forward.
You did good.
You know what?
You're right
Tom?
on time.
Forward to
You're right
seeing
on
you
time.
again.
Wish
All
we
right.
had
Okay.
2 hours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.
So
Thank
very
you.
much. Really
Take care.
appreciate everything you've done.